Well, thanks very much, Nicholas, for the opportunity to describe our program to you in auditory cognitive neuroscience. So this is an Action 2 program. It's not a program of official coursework, but rather it has a focus on training of students through collaborations, international collaborations between universities in Canada and universities in the EU, or at least on the other side of the Atlantic. The program was actually organized by Rudolf Rubisman and Mark Schoenweisner. Rudolf is at the University of Leipzig, Mark is at the University of Montreal. But other universities are involved because this is an Erasmus Mundus program, McMaster being one of these. This slide is from our first meeting, our kickoff meeting, which was held in Leipzig last March, early April. We had approximately 100 trainees there. Most of them would have been PhD students. Some of them would have been postdoctoral fellows. And the program also supports faculty exchanges, so there were several of us faculty there as well. So as I mentioned, our program focuses on auditory cognitive neuroscience, and the exchange provides stipends and travel costs for graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, faculty, and staff among the partner institutions in Europe and North America. The fundamental requirement is that participants in the program at all levels must be studying some aspect of the auditory system, the goal being to understand how the brain processes sound. But this is a rather wide agenda, so some members of our group study emotion, musical emotion, emotion expressed in voice. Not sure this is working. We study sound perception. We study the development of the human auditory system. We do this with functional imaging studies. Other members of the group are interested in auditory physiology, so study auditory processing at the level of synapses, cells, or networks at different levels of the auditory system. And of course, we also study auditory processing in the cortex in human brains using functional imaging techniques. So the range of topics and methodologies is quite wide, which is very good for our students because they get experience with a wide range of different techniques in the various laboratories. The participating universities in our network are in Canada, McGill, the University of Montreal, McMaster, and we have some participation by the University of Toronto as well. Two partner institutions in the United States are the University of Minnesota and New York University, NYU. In France, we have the University of Lyon and the École Normale Supérieure Paris. You can tell from my accent that French is not my first language. And in the UK, the University of Newcastle, Glasgow, and Nottingham. In Germany, I can't read it from here, but I know that it's Leipzig and the Max Planck Institute, and in Finland, Helsinki. And the exchanges amongst all the universities are pretty much charted on this diagram. There are about 40 principal investigators spread across this network, both in Europe and in North America, covering all of the domains of auditory processing that I mentioned. I won't go through this list because it's rather long, but if you look down it, you'll notice that all the universities are represented. Some people work on music cognition, some work on functional brain imaging, some do auditory physiology. But of course, it's the same auditory system, so if you understand one part, it helps you understand other parts. Our program is focused on supporting exchanges, and we have three types. Most of the exchanges involve PhD students and some postdoctoral fellows. The requirements or the parameters around this program are that the exchanges must be at least 6 months in duration. They cannot be more than 10 months in duration. We pay a monthly stipend of 1,500 euros for a PhD student or 1,800 euros for a postdoctoral student. And there's a one-time travel stipend of 2,000 euros. And exchanges must cross the Atlantic. Researchers or students in England can't participate and be funded with researchers in Germany or between Canada and the US. The exchanges must be transatlantic. Now, these stipends may seem rather low compared to some of the other figures mentioned in the training grant, but I need to emphasize that all the participants in our Erasmus Mundus program have tuition-free agreements with participating universities. So there are no costs to students to come from Germany, for example, to Canada, with the exception that some universities may charge a fee for student services, such as your local bus pass or something like this. But the exchanges themselves do not incur any tuition. This money goes directly to the students, and when translated into Canadian dollars, is a fairly reasonable level of support. Faculty are also participants in the program. Faculty exchanges must be at least 1 month in duration. They can be as many as 3 months. The monthly stipend is a little more, 2,500 euros, and there's a one-time travel stipend of 2,000 euros. I see a misprint there. Faculty get as much as the students do. And again, the exchanges must cross the Atlantic. We have had 2 calls for students, and a 3rd call is planned, but it will be conditional upon successfully renewing the program next year. These are the exchanges in the first call. The color coding on the slide, by the way, didn't translate into PowerPoint correctly. But the blue line are student exchanges between Canada and Europe. The red lines are between Europe and Canada, and the green are faculty exchanges. So the first call was issued a little over a year ago. There are approximately 25 exchanges total. The second call was issued earlier this year, and we have approximately another 15 to 18 students participating, and there may be some faculty as well. So the network is very active. I might just talk a little bit about McMaster, because obviously I know that program best. This is the Department of Psychology, Neuroscience, and Behavior at McMaster, and around the front of this building is wrapped the new McMaster Institute for Music and Mind. I have to say, this is the artist's drawing. The construction started last week, but this will be one focus of auditory research at McMaster, but there are several other auditory researchers as well. The people at McMaster who are currently involved in the program, the faculty, are Susanna Becker, who's a computational neuroscientist in the Department of Psychology, Neuroscience, and Behavior. Her interest is in auditory processing, in hearing loss, and also in musical and auditory memory. Stephen Brown is interested in voice, and also in the neuroethology of voice, how voice inflections and so on contain signals that are significant for conspecifics, in the case of humans, human conspecifics. Ian Bruce is in the Department of Electrical and Computing Engineering, and his interest is in the peripheral auditory system, and he's also a computational neuroscientist. Paul Four is an auditory physiologist who studies bats and echolocation, again from an evolutionary perspective. Dita Gillespie is an auditory physiologist. He's interested in auditory mechanisms at the level of synapses and intracellular signaling, and does a lot of work in subcortical auditory nuclei. My interest is in neuroplasticity in the human auditory system, which we study from development to the senior years using functional imaging techniques, mainly EEG and some MEG. We also have an interest in tinnitus. And my colleague Laurel Traynor is interested in music perception. Laurel is the founder of the McMaster Institute for Music and Mind, and her current work is focused on auditory motor interactions. At this time, we've had 3 students at McMaster involved in the Erasmus Mundus program. The first 2 worked on problems of auditory perception and in the integration of auditory motor activity. The third student is Francesca Sterling, who's with me here today, and I'll come to Francesca in just a moment. Since this program is focused on specific topics, I thought I'd give you just one example of the flavor of that kind of work. And the example is tinnitus, which is chronic ringing of the ears. I actually have a sound clip that I can play, but I'm not going to play it because it's not very loud, but I can sing it for you. Most people who have tinnitus have hearing loss. Tinnitus can occur at any age. It's surprising how many young people find our lab at McMaster who have a problem of continuously ringing ears. It can be a very disturbing phenomenon, but it's more common in the senior years. For most individuals, the sound is that of a high-pitched tone that has a life of its own. It never goes away. For others, it may be a high-pitched hiss or ringing sound. So all of these sounds constitute tinnitus. And if someone wants to hear an example, you can come up later on, and perhaps I'll play it for you. One fundamental property of tinnitus is that it is related to hearing loss. So here we have a group of 60 subjects. This is their hearing function. These are hearing thresholds plotted down. So these are good hearing thresholds, meaning that the intensity of sound required before you first hear it is very low. These are poor hearing thresholds, meaning that the sound has to be presented at quite a loud intensity before it's detected. And we have frequency along the bottom here. So we go from about 250 hertz, which would be close to middle C on the piano, to up to almost 16 kilohertz, which is the limit of human hearing for most individuals. And you can see this is the range of normal hearing above here. So these sound thresholds are all in the region of hearing loss. This light-colored line here shows the frequencies that people with tinnitus judge to be part of their tinnitus percept. And you can see that the frequencies that are judged to be part of the tinnitus percept commence at the edge of hearing and are judged to be more like their tinnitus as the frequency of the hearing loss, as the frequency of the sound increases and the depth of hearing loss increases. So the pitches or frequencies that comprise the tinnitus sensation mirror the region of hearing loss. This dark line is a different measure. Here what one can do is you can engineer a sound that contains the same frequencies that are in the tinnitus. And if you present that sound for about a minute and turn it off, the tinnitus will be suppressed. This is called residual inhibition. And what this black line is doing is it shows you the extent to which residual inhibition depends upon the center frequency of the noise sound that you're presenting. So these are band-limited noises. It's not white noise. There's a range of frequencies in them. The sounds have different center frequencies. And those sounds that give you the best residual inhibition have their center frequencies also in the region of hearing loss. So what these two graphs tell us is they tell us that what neurons in the hearing loss region are doing is generating tinnitus, and stopping what they're doing suppresses it. And the scientific question here is to understand what the neurons are doing and where they're doing it. Now, that last slide showed that tinnitus is related to hearing loss, but one of the puzzles in the field of tinnitus is that there are individuals who have tinnitus, but their hearing thresholds are completely normal. How do we understand this problem? So here we have a result. These data are from Philippe Fournier and Sylvie Ibert at the University of Montreal. We're showing two groups of subjects. Both of these groups have normal hearing thresholds. Their audiograms are completely normal. One group has tinnitus, that's this group here. The other group doesn't. This is the control group. And what we're measuring here is the subject's reported perceived loudness of a sound as a function of sound intensity. So these are loudness growth functions. So people with normal hearing report that as the physical intensity of the sound increases, so also does their perceived loudness. You'll notice that if you look at the subjects who have tinnitus, their loudness growth functions are steeper. These individuals report sounds to be louder than their matched control subjects. So these subjects are showing increased sensitivity to loudness. This is called hyperacusis. And so even though hearing thresholds are the same in these two groups, their perceived loudness is not the same. Loudness grows more steeply. These are animal data, not from our lab at all. This is from a group at Harvard. These are mice. And here we're measuring loudness growth functions as well. But instead of measuring perceived loudness with behavior, here loudness is measured by the first wave of the auditory brainstem response. So you don't have to know what that is, but what that response is it measures output from the cochlea. It measures out from the ear. So this is how loudness growth accelerates as a function of sound intensity in normal hearing mice. This is how loudness growth increases with intensity in mice who've been exposed to traumatic noise and have some hearing impairment. Interestingly, that hearing impairment does not show up for sounds of very low threshold. If you were to measure the audiograms of these mice, they would be completely overlapping because the output of the cochlea for very low intensity sounds is normal. But the output of the cochlea for sounds that are louder is actually subnormal. So here's a paradox. These data show that animals who have been exposed to traumatic noise show reduced output from the cochlea. But over here we see that people with tinnitus, oh, by the way, that result has been confirmed in humans as well. That's an important finding, and that report came out just about a month ago. So this is true of humans as well. So even though the output of the cochlea is reduced, their loudness perception is enhanced. So there's a puzzle here. These results tell us that when a person encounters hearing damage, there's increased gain in central auditory pathways. And how does this increased gain take place? And at what level of the projection pathway does it occur? So this is one of the questions that Francesca is working on. And I think I'm probably just going to skip over this slide for the moment. And I'm going to introduce Francesca, who will tell you a little bit about what she's doing at McMaster and a little bit about the program.
Hello everyone, I'm Francesca, and Larry's just asked me to speak for a couple of minutes about my experience as a student on the Research Exchange programme. So I'm an audiology PhD student at the University of Manchester in the UK, and I'm here on a 6-month exchange, and I've been here for just over a month now and having a great time. And I just thought, first of all, I'd talk about my motivations for applying for this exchange. And the first of these really was to gain research experience in a different place. I'm really interested in auditory neuroscience, and my degree was more of a clinical training program. I started my PhD because of my interest in auditory neuroscience, and having done my degree and the first 2 years of my PhD at the same institution, I wanted to see, well, how do people do this kind of work in other places? And the second motivation really was just to experience living in a different place. Canada seemed a very exciting prospect to me. McMaster has a great reputation for the kind of work that I'm doing. So basically, as soon as I found out that there was an opportunity to go and live somewhere else whilst enhancing my PhD and my future career prospects, hopefully, I contacted Larry straight away and wanted to find out more about the programme. So whilst I'm here, I'm working on 2 different projects. Most of my time is spent in Larry's lab working on the loudness growth in tinnitus project that he was just talking about. So we're looking at brain activity in tinnitus patients, basically, and how that's different to people with normal hearing or with hearing loss without tinnitus. And I'm also spending some time working in Laurel Trainer's auditory development lab, looking at brain activity in very young infants and auditory development. So I also want to talk a little bit about the support that I've received in my application process and planning for coming here. I had a lot of contact with Larry and staff at McMaster, first of all in submitting a proposal for funding, and then after I found out that I'd got the place, we were in contact a lot trying to figure out things like where was I going to live and what are the student visa requirements, and I had a lot of support in those areas. I'd just like to say the international student services at McMaster were fantastic, and they were in contact with me all of the time whilst I was planning to come here. And since I've got here, they organise a lot of events, which is demonstrated by this picture here, which shows us at the lovely Dundas Peak in Hamilton. Where I got the chance to meet lots of people and explore a bit more. So basically, I feel like already in the first few weeks, I've learnt an awful lot, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the next 5 months have in store. But thank you very much. I'll come back over to Larry now.
I want to say that from the point of view of the lab, it's been wonderful to have Francesca there, and I think this example illustrates for us some of the major benefits of the Erasmus Mundus program. We are a laboratory in auditory neuroscience. McMaster does not have a program that trains audiologists. Those programs in Ontario are found at University of Western Ontario and Toronto and elsewhere. Not very many places, actually. So for us, it's great to have someone in the laboratory who has that clinical background. As Francesca mentioned, she is a licensed audiologist and has the clinical training and experience that we value a great deal. On the other hand, we have some of the scientific interests and techniques in brain imaging and in psychoacoustic assessment that I think Francesca will take with her back to England, and we will want her to come back to McMaster many times in the future. So it's a very good example of how Erasmus Mundus has certainly worked at McMaster, and we could tell similar stories at McGill, at Leipzig, University of Montreal as well. Thank you.